All right, hi everyone. This is just a training call for our biennial learning session coordinators who are going to be helping out with a number of different projects at Biennial, most importantly the 140 learning sessions that make up our 4 different tracks. In line with our audacious hospitality work and our disabilities inclusion under the Ruderman grant, Rabbi Edie Mencher and Joe Robbins are going to kick us off and explain a little bit about some best practices that we can share with our presenters and incorporate into all of our work, not only at Biennial but especially at Biennial. So I'm going to hit mute and turn it over to Edie and Joe for the next 30 minutes.
Thank you, Isaac, and welcome to everyone, and thank you for taking the time to speak with us today. And I want to reiterate what Isaac said in a way that we're hoping that everything that we discuss is going to be helpful in ways that go beyond biennial, but also go beyond disabilities inclusion as we work to plan sessions. That the suggestions that we're making will help us all to feel confident about making certain that everyone can participate and can feel that their concerns are part of the Jewish story. So as part of the URJ Presidential Disabilities Inclusion Initiative, we're working to weave disabilities inclusion into every aspect of our work, and to achieve that goal of seamless integration, even we're asking, and we'll provide more information about this moving forward, that even in sessions not specifically about inclusion, that we also want to help presenters find brief ways to address the prevalence of disability and health conditions among us. I will tell you more about this, but I do want to take a moment to say why we're adding health conditions. Because many people who have health conditions that require accommodations don't identify with the term disability, and it helps us to recognize that so many of us do find it easier to fully join in a session, don't hesitate to be there if we know that what we need is going to be provided. So what we mean by that is it may be that there is easy access to restrooms because of a health condition that requires that. And you'll hear as we go through this that what we're suggesting is as important for someone who does not identify as having a disability as someone who does. And I want to make clear that our staff, and we'll introduce everyone later, is going to be available to provide resources to which you and presenters can refer participants so that the focus of the planned session isn't changed. What I mean is we're going to tell you ways in which if you mention how this might affect, how we might integrate the needs of people with disabilities in your session, you don't have to derail the session, but in fact can tell them who will provide more information beyond the time of the workshop. And I also want to say that the suggestions we're providing here will also include approaches and specific practices that easily and respectfully are going to increase access to learning for everybody. So that we're going to use this as a jumping off point. We're using a model of universal design and wherever possible. And that means introducing principles and practices that definitely make it possible for people with disabilities and ongoing medical conditions to participate, but it increases access for everyone else. And an example of this, of universal design, is that we're all familiar with, is an automatically opening door in a store or a hotel or an office. And it certainly helps people using wheelchairs or walkers, but it also helps people carrying small children, packages, older adults, and the rest of us. And providing it doesn't call attention or stigmatize the person who has the need for it because of a disability. So we want to make most of our accommodations work in that way. I want to take this moment, I think everyone here knows me, but this will also go to our biennial presenters, and I'm Rabbi Edie Mencher, and I coordinate the URJ's Presidential Disabilities Inclusion Initiative, and that's part, we work together with the Ruderman Family Foundation in doing this work. And you can reach me at Mencher, M-E-N-C-H-E-R, at urj.org. We also have a new program associate who will be available to offer all sorts of help about Biennial, and her name is Joan Hockey at JHOCKY@urj.org, and I'll just take a moment. Joe will introduce himself later, but Joseph Robbins, who's our assistant director, is at JROBBINS@urj.org. And I'm going to turn it over to Joe now.
Great, thanks, Edie. Hi, everybody. Good to see all of you. I'm Joe Robbins. I'm the Assistant Director of the Presidential Disabilities Inclusion Initiative, as Edie mentioned. The next section topic that we wanted to talk about was language, which is obviously a huge part of everything that we do, and this is doubly true in our sessions and how we plan for them. Ableism is an ism, just like racism, anti-Semitism, sexism, all of the other isms, and it comes from the place of assuming that there is a norm, that people without disabilities are better than people with disabilities, and vice versa, that people with disabilities are inferior to quote unquote normal people. And one of the ways that we really see this, a lot of it's inherent. We've been socialized to be ableist in many ways, like with other types of isms, but assuming that someone can't do something because they have a disability. So one practical example is, for a lot of people, a lot of us, when we see someone who is blind, we might want to rush over and help guide them, when maybe that's the last thing that the person needs, because getting our help could actually cause them to fall over or lose their place when they didn't need it to begin with. So that's an example of ableism. And the reason we wanted to mention ableism is it really fits into a lot of the other areas that we try and avoid and ways we try and model language. So we shouldn't be assuming that the norm is a white cisgender Jew who's presenting to another white cisgender Jew, for example. And we also shouldn't assume that people don't have disabilities, or that they don't have, like Edie mentioned, health concerns that need to be addressed. So just kind of keeping that awareness in mind as a general awareness going into this, knowing that we're going to be with thousands of people, many of whom we don't know, and even the people we do know, we don't know what they might have going
on. Joe, you're going to continue now, or I'll go into session content?
Go ahead.
Okay. So I mentioned earlier that there are two elements to our efforts. One is to make sure that the physical space and our behavior promotes disabilities inclusion and keeps people who, for any reason, from feeling marginalized. And we're going to give more details about that after. But what we're introducing as a second level now, and perhaps for the first time, is that how we, as we are creating our session content, how we integrate disabilities, inclusion, and health conditions in a sort of seamless way without really changing the whole content of our session. And this is part of the URJ's principle of not siloing this as a special subject, but rather making it part of our being audaciously hospitable and fully welcoming to everyone. So what would this mean? The first thing is that each presenter should consider addressing the way in which their subject has an impact upon and can address the needs of people with disabilities and health conditions. It may be one sentence. It may be two sentences, but here are some examples. And please know that I have just picked these at random, and people presenting on these topics may already be doing this. if, for example, in a session on welcoming young families, presenters might mention the importance of reaching out and involving young families in which a child has a disability, because this may be the age at which someone is newly diagnosed and a family is reeling and not knowing how will they be part of the Jewish community, or there may be parents with ongoing health conditions. So in mentioning this, as we're encouraging congregations to do innovative approaches to engaging families, we can say this and then say more information is provided, and we will provide resources on our Disabilities Inclusion website by contacting us or by contacting the leaders like Nancy Bossoff and Kathy Rowland, but just to mention it, it will be crucial. Another example would be in due structure, a one-line sentence to say that families in which there is a member with a serious medical and ongoing medical condition or a disability have extraordinary additional expenses, and many people with disabilities are not employed in the fields for which they are trained, enormous unemployment, and please take that into account as you set dues and figure out how to sensitively respond so that people don't fail to become part of our communities. The same with Bar and Bat Mitzvah session. One sentence about many innovations in the way we create Bar and Bat Mitzvah experiences and teach have evolved through our understanding that children with disabilities, including learning disabilities, may benefit from a different approach and may participate in an innovative way. And then again, they can be told there are other resources and the session can move on. But this is a new approach for us to saying, we won't just have a session for every topic on people with disabilities. And another issue I want to mention that is part of sessions that you should anticipate may not happen, that if you don't do this or mention disabilities, someone with a disability or with a child or grandchild with a disability may raise their hand and say, well, what about my deaf grandchild, or how come they aren't in a preschool, or aren't able to join a synagogue? And that's a perfect time to, if you haven't done it, to answer in a supportive and encouraging way, not let the session be derailed, tell people we're working on this and refer them to the appropriate people. So we're really suggesting to use disabilities as a teaching point, keeping in mind that this is equally important when we're dealing with other areas, whether it is race, interfaith, gay and lesbian and transgendered issues, whatever it is, to make a mention where it's relevant, not as a throwaway, but to put it in there, that we know there are special considerations and we care about how this subject has an impact for people who identify in that way. Joe, will you go on about language now?
Sure. So the first piece of language we wanted to address was the term special needs. As many of you probably know, special needs was the norm and was used for many years in describing people with disabilities, and is still used in many places. Edie and I are in constant contact with the disabilities world and disability self-advocates, and part of that is staying on top of language and the newest and current trends in disabilities inclusion. So without getting into that too much, one of the major developments is the term special needs has fallen out of favor in the disabilities world. The reason being that we all have needs. Some of us just need accommodations to be able to go on with our daily lives. So again, not assuming what the norm is, that normal is the normal. We each have our own normal, and some of us just need some extra help, but we don't have special needs. So as a result, we've been working on phasing that language out of the union and not using special needs anymore, and a lot of other disabilities organizations have also. One important thing to note about phasing it out, we'll get a lot of people, whether in our presentation, from our presenters, who have degrees in special education or who are the special needs coordinator at their congregation. If that's someone's title, we obviously don't change it. That is their title, and they can work on changing that as the language changes. But if someone's the special needs coordinator, that's their title. Obviously, if someone has a degree in special education, that's what their degree is in. But like with all other things, and Edie and I are here to help with this, all other things related to this presentation, it's always best to ask a person with a disability. We have a biennial presenter who doesn't consider herself to have a disability, so she prefers the term special needs because to her the word disability is more disparaging than the term special needs. So it's always best to check, but that's kind of the rule of thumb. Some other language points, people use a wheelchair. They are never confined to a wheelchair or wheelchair bound. The reason is wheelchair bound and confined both allude to suffering and have a negative connotation, and it sounds like we're pitting someone, that they're stuck in their wheelchair, when for many people that is not the case. Again, that's their norm, and that's how they live their lives, and they don't feel confined or bound, especially people with lifelong disabilities. Similarly, in general, has a disability or lives with a disability, never suffers from a disability or struggles with a disability. And these all come from disability self-advocates. Next is disparaging language. We've come a long way in terms of language. We know that it's not okay to call someone retarded or use retarded in a negative way unrelated to an intellectual or cognitive disability. And in general, we don't say retarded, even if that would have been a medical diagnosis. Now it's intellectual and cognitive disability. The place where this comes up probably more than ever nowadays is calling someone crazy or psycho, or saying they were a spaz or schizo. All of these terms that are part of our language, regular language that we never even think of, that actually come from a disparaging place for people with mental illness. One of the reasons why is mental illness is intermittent. Oftentimes people have a diagnosis or don't, but they all aren't always in that state, like with depression. And whether they are or not, we want to respect that and make sure not to disparage anybody. And we've seen a lot of positive changes that have been made. We know not to use racially charged terms. We know it's not okay to say that's so gay about something, just like we wouldn't say that's retarded. And we're working on getting this other language in the same way and really modeling this during our presentations. We probably all say that's crazy. So it's a tough thing to change, but if we specifically can focus on making these changes in our presentations to model it for everyone in the session, it's a great starting point for doing away with the destructive norms and not perpetuating the stigma.
Okay, I just want to add one thing. I'm so familiar with what Joe spoke about, but I want to make sure when we talk about why needs aren't special, what people, those of us with disabilities and medical conditions want understood is that we have the same need to be loved, to belong, to learn, to participate. The needs aren't special, the accommodations are. And that's the distinction, because otherwise it sounds as if the person is herself or himself a burden. You know, and we want to change that. I'd like to give now some specific guidelines for while we're presenting, and I do want to mention, because I saw a question, that these are all written out too. There's a document that will be available to everyone with most of what we're talking about today, although we're fleshing it out a bit more. So these are guidelines for actual session presenters. The first is to always use a microphone and don't ask people if they can hear the speaker without it, no matter how loud our voice may be, because people often feel embarrassed to say they cannot hear the speaker. And they won't say, I can't hear, but they won't hear. So we're just assuming that every session will use a mic, and that means that we either pass the mic to another person who's speaking either from a panel or from the group, and if not, we repeat the question or comment into the mic. Please announce when the meeting begins and ends in case people have family members, friends, home healthcare aides coming to bring them to the session to help accompany them when they leave. And also for many people, many of us need to have a sense, otherwise they'll be ruffling through their books. It reduces anxiety and uncertainty, and it gives a sense of organization to the session. Avoid using gestures without accompanying words. And because you have to be aware that with this and using visual points of reference, if you just nod your head and someone has a limited ability to see or is actually blind, they won't know that you just gave an affirmative response. And so say what you certainly can use gesture, but just say what you need to say with equal emphasis in your voice or in your words so that it appears in the captioning to have that emphasis. And please remember that blindness is, that we recognize by seeing someone with a white cane or a service animal, is not the only visual impairment. And many, many people in a room may have macular degeneration, may have glaucoma, may have narrow vision because of a retina problem, and maybe legally blind, so that you won't always know. So assume there are people in the room, and that will make sense of the next suggestions that we're going to make that have to do with describing what you may show in a visual aid. Always face the group to whom you're speaking, because if you turn away, it will impede any sign language interpreter's ability to understand, and also those reading lips and others who rely on visual cues. And it also means that if you're facing the group, you'll be less likely as a presenter to miss reactions or be misunderstood. You'll see that people aren't getting it in some way. And please keep hands, presenters, please keep hands and objects away from your mouth when speaking to facilitate lip reading, remembering again that many people who do not identify as deaf are using visual cues to be able to truly understand. If there's an interpreter in the room, don't walk in front of that person while you're speaking, because that will mean that the person who's utilizing that interpreter won't be able to see. If there's an interpreter in the room, speak to the person for whom the assistant or interpreter is working. And this is not just for interpreters. If anyone has an assistant, always speak directly to that person, the person who is the actual attendee. Just yesterday, there was something on Facebook about a professor who had cerebral palsy, whose speech had some impairment but could be understood, where someone at a airline desk refused to talk to them and only their friend, saying it will be a lot easier to talk to you. We don't want to do that. That disempowers and disrespects whatever the person, it may simply be someone sitting in a wheelchair. We speak to their spouse. That's what we have to not do. Please describe all visual materials, slides and charts and overheads, and ensure that visual materials are printed in a large font and make print copies available. Check in with participations at various times to say, is this understood by everyone? Does anyone have a question? And be prepared to rephrase things, not just repeat them, because sometimes people have a receptive language issue or some sort of communication issue where you're saying it differently will help a lot. And provide a verbal overview of textual materials. People have dyslexia and they can't see well. They are not absorbing it, and don't just put up a slide and wait for everybody to read it. Allow for written questions. Make sure, please, to stop sessions on time for participants to leave enough time for people to get to and from sessions. And make sure all the text is large enough to be read from the back of the room. And please announce, and this is something we're doing that's new, please announce that, and we probably should do this so that people know it before they walk into any room, that seats in front of the presenters should please be taken by people who need to be close to the front to fully participate in and to contribute to the session, such as those with visual, hearing, or any other disability situation or condition, so that people don't have to identify, they can just take the seats. And that seats near the exit should be reserved, please, for people who need easy access to the exits. That can mean for any reason. If somebody knows they're going to be called because of an emergency, it doesn't have to be a disability, but some people need easy access to a restroom because of a medical condition, or they may have anxiety and need to get out, so we need to reserve that. And finally, I want to address if someone should seem emotionally or physically distressed, we have people available to help, and there will always be a volunteer or a board member in the room who can get the attention of an appropriate staff person on a walkie-talkie. On the other hand, that should be that it's clear that they want help. You know, what I mean by that is we have to be prepared to respond to the unexpected or unfamiliar during a session. There may be disrupting sounds, behaviors. What do I mean by this? Someone may have Tourette's, someone may have Alzheimer's, somebody may have a condition in which they utter sounds that may be potentially disruptive, but in general, if we are prepared and poised, we can continue and the person can continue to be in the room. Sometimes people may bring a child or a family member who may clap or jump or do something else that might be disconcerting if we're prepared as presenters, and if we even say so. You know, we can even respond to calm anxiety in the room if necessary. If we see that the person needs to leave, respectfully, we'll have trained staff to know how to approach that person so that they can find a way to participate without being very distressed. And we're going to allow for questions now, but I want to thank all of you and let everyone know how, believe it or not, how we act at Biennial on this issue is going to do more than any workshop on disabilities inclusion, because it shows by our example that, I date myself, but the medium is the message. The way we do this shows what we care about, the respect we feel, and our deep devotion that no one should be humiliated, marginalized, or feel that they can't be with us because nothing has been done to back up the words of welcome with action. So now I don't know if, Isaac, will you moderate questions? Some of them may have been typed.
Sure. So it's 2 o'clock now, Eastern time. For those of you who have a few minutes to stay on, we welcome you to stay on, and we can have a conversation, excuse me, between any of us and Edie and Jill. I also quickly wanted to just share with you my screen so that everybody can see exactly what I'm talking about when we say we have a file that we've put in our staff group in the URJ Yammer that Edie and Joe have put together. these are some really great disability inclusion tips and just in general great inclusion tips for you to share with your presenters. You can actually download this file and send it to them. And this is a recap, a summary of so much of what we've just discussed in the past 30 minutes. So feel free to use this as much as possible in any of your work, but especially your biennial learning session work. I will stop sharing my screen now and look for questions. If there are any questions, you feel free to unmute or type them in, and we can go from there.
Isaac, there were, a couple of things that I think that Edie and Joe mentioned that should be said at the very beginning of sessions, and I'm just wondering if that could be built into the opening that the North American board members do, so we know that it's going to happen and we don't have to worry about whether or not it's being done at every session.
Absolutely. I think that's a really wonderful idea, Lisa, and it's we are already in progress of figuring out what the plan will be for introducing the sessions and involving those board members. I think it's a perfect piece that we could build into their talking points. Anyone else? So not hearing anything else, I'll let Edie and Joe have the very last word, but the big piece that I just want to remind all of you is that take any of this and make it reality. There's the story of the kid walking on the beach and throwing the starfish back into the water and saying, well, it made a difference to that one. And the truth is, for a program like Biennial, where our attendees spend so much money and give so much of their own personal time to advance their own leadership ability and really enhance their relationship with the movement, the little bits that we can do, the little pieces can make a huge difference for our presenters. And so please keep that in mind. Please work with our attendees, our presenters, anybody who you encounter in your role leading up to and during Biennial. And from my team, thank you so much. And Edie, Joe, are there any last words that you might want to leave us with?
Just a word of our availability, both to those coordinating workshops, but also if you want to refer presenters to us for any information that would help because of the topic you're presenting, or if there are questions, we're available, and Joan Hockey is at 633-2 to help. Joe, do you want to add anything?
No, that's it. Yeah, please contact us, like Edie and Isaac said, with any questions. And thank you all for joining, and Isaac for putting this together.
Absolutely. Well, Shabbat Shalom to everyone here, and this recording will be made available next week in our staff Yammer group. Have a great weekend.